on. Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Andrew Ganishow, Director of LaCal, and I thank everyone for joining us today. You know, when we put together this conference with the Planning Committee, a big topic that comes up, it's a big buzzword in the state of Louisiana, STEM. And there are also some acronyms that go with it. We have the STEAM, the STREAM, the STREAMs. But one of the big things when tackling the topic of STEM I see is that there's different stakeholder groups that come into it, different types of groups. We have some that, you know, there's still the stereotype we deal with in Louisiana, you know, are my kids, are the students in my area ready for STEM? There's also the new STEM programs. We are very happy that the Department of Education and the 21st Century Cohort put into the RFP 2 years ago bonus points for 21st century programs starting out STEM. So there are the newfound STEM programs. And then there are your experience programs like robotics clubs and coding clubs throughout the state. So what we wanted to do with this panel today was put together a series of experts and this all-star panel called Full STEM Ahead. And we're gonna really get into that discussion around STEM and the appeal to the different stakeholder groups, and how do we really start crafting that message that I always like to say, Karen, before I throw it to you, I have a motto when it comes to STEM. It's not just about science, it's not just about math, it's about a way of thinking. So I'll throw that tidbit over to you as you introduce the panel.
I appreciate that. That's a great way of looking at it. It really is a way of thinking, a perspective, right? Thank you so much, Andrew. And we're so excited to be here and learn from all of you as well. And I want to say up front, thank you for all the amazing work you all do with young people in the state of Louisiana. Thank you so much. So I'm the CEO, Karen Peterson, the CEO of the National Girls Collaborative Project. And when we were preparing this panel, we had a great session. And so I'm really excited for all of you to hear from these fabulous panelists. I'm just going to tell you a little bit about why I'm involved in this work. A very long time ago, I was doing a project with some young girls at an elementary school, fifth graders, that was 3 miles away from the Microsoft headquarters in Washington State. And it was a little after school computer project. And many of these girls weren't interested, and they didn't even really know how to use the mouse. In those days, all computers had mice, right? And so I had to write a paper. I was in school, I had to write a paper about it. And the first line of my paper was something like, 3 miles away from Microsoft, girls don't know how to use the mouse, right? And I was in sort of a degree program, and that really led me to start thinking about, why aren't these girls excited about using computers, right? What are some of the barriers? And so now I think I'd like to ask Meeta to introduce herself. And I know that you have some information about your past, about what has brought you to this work. And so I'll turn it over to you.
Thank you, Karen. Hey, everyone. And yes, I also echo Karen's thanks for all you do. You're really right there with young people every day. I am Meeta Sharma-Holt. I'm with Techbridge Girls. We're a national nonprofit that equips educators to reach and impact young people through STEM, in particular girls from marginalized communities. I am in this work because for all of my years in the out of school time field, there is nothing better than to see a young person find their it. Have you ever seen it, that gleam in their eyes? It is amazing. It is captivating. And that's what we drive towards every day. We want girls in particular to find their it. And if STEM is it, then we know that they have a better shot at economic mobility and life choices, and then we all win.
Thanks, Meeta. Also, I invite all of you to share your stories in the chat, and also to introduce yourself so that we can get to know a little bit more about you. Linda, would you introduce yourself?
I have a story from a long time ago too, probably even older than yours, Karen.
Okay.
I had my personal and career path started when I was the parent of my son over 30 years ago when he was attending a preschool co-op, which meant once a week I had to go to school with him and be a parent educator at his co-op. And what really struck me about my experience there was watching the kids start their day and come in through the door and see how differently boys and girls were talked to and the direction and the activity that they were steered towards. And so the boys were sent to the area with these great building blocks, and they built these amazing towers and structures, and you could just see the future engineers on the floor in that co-op. Whereas the girls were steered towards the dress-up area or the stuffed animals, and they got to work on their nurturing skills and social skills, and the boys and girls were divided. And it seemed like such a missed opportunity. And my role at the co-op was to be the parent educator. And so what I did was think like, I've got to do something and I've got to change this. So doing some social engineering, I worked with parents to be able to really help boys and girls kind of see opportunities to play together and to work with the same kind of toys. And it was great to see the girls discover a love of building and working with the building blocks when given the opportunity. So I've spent my life really thinking about like, how do we continue to spark that interest in girls with building blocks and toys and engineering, and really think about how do we involve families in it to kind of break the gender stereotypes and really do some social engineering to get all kids finding an interest in STEM.
That's a great story. Remember those days, Linda. Brenda, would you introduce yourself, please?
Yes, and I will add my thanks to everyone for being here and also for the important work that you all do. I'm also with the National Girls Collaborative Project, and if you're not familiar with us, we're a national network of organizations invested in increasing gender equity in STEM. And my role is really focused on bringing research to practice for practitioners. And I have a background in gender equity and working in and with after school programs. So the work I get to do now is a really nice combination of those things. And I'll just tell us a personal story about when I was in school, which is one of the things that brings me to this work and keeps me in this work. I was one of those kids, one of those girls who really liked math and science, especially math. I loved math. I still love math today, but I wasn't necessarily encouraged. So I remember this story still today, and this was quite a while ago, so it says something that I remember it. I was in an advanced math course, either junior or senior year of high school, and I was just one of a few young women in that class. But one of the other young women was a very good friend of mine. And so she and I really just stuck together, and we always sat together and we talked a lot, and we got in trouble a lot because we were, I guess, talking too much. And, we were trying to work together, and I think we probably felt isolated to a certain extent. But I remember toward the end of that course, our teacher said to us that he didn't think we were cut out for math. And we were doing well in that course. It's not that we weren't doing well in it. So it obviously made an impact and has stuck with me. And I really do believe that it impacted kind of how I thought about my next steps in terms of education and career. So it's really important to me for all girls and all youth really to be able to have a positive experience with STEM and to be able to see that STEM is for them and they can do STEM, so that it's a choice and it's not a choice that somebody else is making for them.
Thank you for sharing that. And thanks to all of you for sharing your stories. I think it really provides some insight into why this work is needed. But not everybody is deeply involved in equity and inclusion. So why do we care about equity and inclusion, especially about broadening participation in STEM? And what does it mean, and sort of why does it matter? So we're going to start off with this really big question, right? But I think it's important to talk about that first. And maybe I could ask Linda, could I ask you to start? And I also, I want to encourage attendees to ask questions in the chat as we go along, because it's really, we have time to have some additional conversations and to answer your questions. So now I will turn it over to you, Linda. Thanks.
Great. And I realized that in my story, I forgot to actually say what I have as my job title. I'm an advisor with STEM Next Opportunity Fund on their family engagement project. And pre that project, I was the founder and the former CEO of Techbridge Girls. So I've spent 17 years working in after-school programs with girls and families and partners. So, you know, I think in terms of thinking about equity and broadening participation, where I always go is that there's so many opportunities and resources that are out there. Andrew, you had mentioned about some of the programs and opportunities with robotics and other programs that are available for kids. But I always step back and think about who are the youth and the families that are able to take advantage of those opportunities. And I always struggle when sometimes riches go to the privileged. So for me, it's always thinking about how can we really make sure and think about, you know, who knows about programs that are out there, because there's so many that are on the internet or in communities, who has access and is able to register for those sorts of programs. You know, how are people able to get their transportation wise or fit it within their schedule? How are kids able to really benefit and take advantage of a program so they're coming away feeling better about themselves and better about computing and not worse as a result of participating in those programs? And I've talked with families that have, you know, that have been at great enrichment programs and asked, like, you know, how did you find out about it? How are you participating in it? And I sometimes have heard from one student talk about it takes mom magic, and that her mother just seems to magically know where to go and know who to ask and, you know where to access things on the internet to have her be able to participate in tons of great things. Well, I can't help but think, you know, who might not have that mom magic and might not, you know, have a schedule that enables her to register for an event and know about something and be able to make sure that her son or daughter is able to take advantage of great opportunities. And I've seen firsthand how our after-school programs can really change lives. And it's not just about having opportunities to take part in great activities that are fun and engaging and inspiring, but also the additional resources those experiences can bring, whether it's like getting new contacts and networks, finding the next opportunity to go to, having a mentor or a role model who can help you when you're at a moment in your life where you're struggling and doubting and wondering, you know, do I continue to persist and go on? Am I good enough to be in that math program? So I think for me, that's one of the things that's really important. The other plug or just quick thing I want to say is it's so important for us to also think about youth with disabilities when we're thinking about broadening participation, because I think we typically go to thinking about girls or underrepresented students or students of color, but we often forget about students who have disabilities and really thinking about how we include them in our STEM programs as well.
Karen, if I can just follow up to that. This is Andrew here, and I just would like to add to that and kind of
go for it. Yes, please.
One of the biggest issues, and I'm curious if any of our participants would like to join into, one of the biggest issues I see with equity, kind of going back to the point I made at the beginning, is it often is the STEM stereotypes that hold a student back, particularly low SES students, where, you know, I had a person put it to me this way one time: the biggest problem with STEM is the last initial and the first initial and the stereotypes around that, meaning the first word is science. Most people with not a background in science think of Bunsen burners and lab coats. And then you got math and TI-82 calculators. And so if you don't come from a background or a family that's interested in science, you have those images and they will deter them from even being interested in STEM, not realizing that, you know, there's a welding component to STEM. There's an auto repair component to STEM, whereas they don't even realize that they've been doing STEM type activities, and the big overwhelming stereotypes of science and math will often hinder that low SES student from even showing any interest in it or the family background as well. So I guess my question is, like, have you seen that other parts of the country? Any suggestions, and also from the field, do y'all see that as well?
I'm sure you all have something to say about this, right? And I see that Meeta is actually, both Meeta and Brenda are unmuted. So why don't you take it away, Meeta, and then we'll have Brenda follow up. I know we all have a lot to say about that question.
But thank you, and thank you for that question too, because I think it comes to one of the hearts of where I think we have an opportunity. I think we all agree here that if we can encourage young people, especially those from marginalized groups, to STEM, they will do better and we will all do better, right? That's the floor. But the question then is, if there are so many programs and they're out there, you know, what are the barriers? And Linda, I think, appropriately talks about how do we encourage sort of a larger community around our young people so that those barriers are eliminated. And then Andrew, you're talking about the messages, and the thing I want to sort of piggyback on is the thing we're starting to push up against is this question about inclusion. We kind of resist that definition because we think that our young people and our families, especially those of color, have always been part of the STEM lineage. They don't need to be included into a field where they've always, you know, actually shown resilience and creativity. And so I think I really do think at the center of this can be the stereotypes that are pervade, and in so doing, I think the opportunity for us as practitioners is to then make sure that in the environments where we are engaging young people, we don't perpetuate those, right? We are constantly thinking about the barriers that might exist, and we make sure that family engagement is a natural piece of how we encourage and recruit young people. That if we have a co-gender program, that we're making sure that there's facilitators there that are trained well to create and not redo biases, to create positivity and not kind of you know, perpetuate biases that might exist for young people as they walk into their rooms. And that's I think some of the things that we all have been working really hard at. So I think that's one important thing, as well as, like you said, then showing and showcasing the brilliance of our young people so that then they see themselves perpetuated out in the media and in their community. And so that message is beyond just our voices speaking loudly.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's, Meeta's really, you touched on so much of what I also believe and think, and I appreciate your response. And just to kind of echo and maybe add a couple things that, you know, I think it's also about actively countering those stereotypes, right? So we certainly don't want to perpetuate them, but we also need to address them and counter them. And that's something that I don't think we've done super well in our field. Historically, I think a lot of us used to have that perception of, we don't want to talk about, you know, we don't really talk about this explicitly. And so I think bringing those stereotypes to the forefront actually has been shown to be pretty helpful to kids from marginalized communities. And then I think the strategies, so we talk a lot about not, you know, the problem isn't our youth, obviously, but there is a problem with STEM and how we see STEM and how STEM is portrayed. And so I think also what we want to do is change STEM, right? And make those personal connections for our youth with what they are already involved with, what they already know that is STEM. So Andrew, you touched on this beautifully, right? And it's not just this special knowledge that these people have to be able to do STEM. And a simple example is just some strategies that we can use with youth in learning spaces where we make sure that everybody gets an equal opportunity to use the STEM tools that you're using, like you're doing a hands-on activity, right? This is just an example. And often the kids that are more familiar with those tools and with STEM are the ones who will dive in and kind of grab those, and they get more out of that experience than the kids who might be stepping back a little bit. And so, there are things like that we can really facilitate in our learning spaces to try to help everyone get to a place of understanding STEM differently and starting to feel that sense of I also belong in STEM.
That was really helpful. And I think what we're really kind of moving into a discussion now is really about designing equitable spaces, right? And thinking about what are some of the specifics around broadening participation in after school, some of those real specific strategies that folks who are working in after school can use. I think maybe Meeta, would you like to start sort of building upon that topic for us?
Sure, thanks. I think this is really helpful because, I've been in the after school arena for about 30 years, started out as a group leader in the Bronx with a small group of 6 and 7-year-olds. And I remember being untrained, being strapped for time, and sort of having limited resources to be creative. And when I received that support as a practitioner, I did better, and so did my kids. And I sort of carried that through to then our work at Techbridge Girls. And there are just so many lessons learned from our 21 years of being practitioners and then educating others. And some of the barriers honestly aren't necessarily even about the STEM or all of that. Some of the barriers are really just about the environment around the educator or the resources provided for educators to be able to do their work with young people. So, I guess it's a question for all of us about how can we create, if we want equity, how can we maybe start that also with providing an equitable learning or equity for our educators. Often they're young people and practitioners working part-time or full-time, but are just working with limited resources. So how can we make sure that those foundational things are there? As an example, at Techbridge Girls, we learned a really hard lesson of having our staff run around and kit all the materials in advance and spread them all on the floor, or have, run around to CVS in the morning and buy the toothpicks or whatever. And so we learned that time spent, while it seems like it's okay, that's part of the job, it's time spent that the person could have been doing other things, like maybe just centering themselves, making sure the environment was right, making sure they understood the skills of the STEM. So for an example is the Techbridge Girls in our curricula, everything we do is provided with pre-kitted materials. We just want to eliminate that barrier so that that's not something that folks are spending their time in. We also know that training is vital. And so I know that as a young practitioner and then a not so young practitioner, I just, had to really clamor for enough training sessions to have the time to do that. And then later, as I was training my own team members, I had to create all the training myself. And I think that we do that in after school programs. So I'd also really recommend that we all seek out really strong, vital training programs and put the resources in to allow our practitioners to have the grounding so that when they're out there with young people, they're fully equipped to engage them. There's a couple examples of how to create equity in this space.
That's really helpful. I also, of course, my question now is there a role for families and community in this, Linda?
Yes, I'm so glad we're including this question as part of the discussion, because when we really look to see like what captures kids' interest and keeps them sustained in STEM, it really is families. We can do great things in our after school programs, but our children are spending most of their time at home, and there's an opportunity at home and in their community and neighborhood to engage and really connect with STEM. So what's interesting is that when you look at the research to see what really matters, it's not a family's, education attainment or them being a professional in technology or engineering or having a college degree, but it's their encouragement of their child that matters most in terms of kids engaging in STEM and staying with it. And encouragement takes many forms, from, just asking a question when your child comes home from an after school program to see what they did and what they liked. You know, asking the child to show them a project that they come home with and explain how they did it, going to the library together or watching something on TV or just talking about science is what really matters. Most parents don't know that. And what we've heard often from parents is them feeling bad that they don't have the expertise or, you know, what it takes to be that, you know, support or teacher for their child. So I think a part of what we can do is just really affirm to families and let them know what they're doing and, you know, and what that matters and like the impact it has on their child. And also be able to help parents learn from one another. So if there's something that they want to do more and do better, learning from another parent about how they do that is really empowering for families. Digital Youth Divas does a great job in terms of empowering families with research around the roles. And I think we're going to be putting into the chat a resource that you can look to in terms of how you really engage parents and help them understand those roles. And then I think the other thing that's so important is for us to really listen first and learn from and with families. As we design our after school programs, our summer camps, any resources that we want to have for kids and families to find out what do they want and need, to be able to build on that question that Andrew had asked in terms of like, you know, welding is STEM, and just really helping parents be able to kind of connect with their interest and needs and have it be relevant. But not assume that we know what parents want. A quick lesson learned I had with Techbridge Girls was, you know, parents said, well, I want to know what's going on in the after school program. You know, my daughter comes home and doesn't talk about it. I want to be able to support her. So we thought, okay, we'll do updates. We'll do newsletters. We spent so much time into getting the perfect looking newsletter. It went home months after the after school program's activity or field trip that it was like kind of irrelevant. So just really listening, what do families want? And then getting back to them to say like, this is what I think I'm hearing. This is what I think you want, you know, is it? And just really being informed by listening to family members. And it's a learning process. You know, we have lessons learned, we make mistakes, and just building upon those lessons.
Linda,
That's really helpful.
I just want to quickly mention the fast forward, we end up using group texts instead, and they're just a faster, easier way to literally take a photo of a girl doing something which sparks you know, a question at home. So yeah, we learned from that. Sorry, Karen.
No, I'm glad you brought that up, because I was thinking about how beautiful your newsletter must have been and well-intentioned, right? But ultimately not as helpful as you wanted. I know that Louisiana is deeply involved in the Million Girl Moonshot work, and Linda and Brenda and Meeta and I are all really involved in it. And NGCP created an equity and inclusion framework. And so I'm just going to ask Brenda to say a little bit about the framework and how it supports this conversation we're having about equity and inclusion. And I'm going to put the link to the framework in the chat.
Okay, great. Yeah, I was just going to ask if you could do that. Thank you, Karen. Yeah, so with MGM, Million Girls Moonshot, we created this framework, and it's based on research and practice. So we took what we knew from research on STEM after school, but also what we know from the field, right? So it's very practical. But the idea with this framework is that it's a tool for after school programs to think about their work in terms of equity. So it has three kind of main categories. You'll see if you open it up, and then within each category or large focus area, we have a variety of strategies that you can tackle. And then we have supporting resources to help you implement those strategies. So the idea is really that you don't take all of the ideas on this framework and try to do them all, right? The idea is that you can look at the tool and at least narrow down, you can look and see what you're already doing, and then you can look and say, where are some areas that we could maybe strengthen our practice in terms of equity in our after school programs? Where are some places that we could add value? And so, for example, and they're all based on, you know, things that we know help create an equitable experience for our youth in STEM. So For example, it includes family engagement, Linda just talked about, and community engagement, and the importance of that for supporting our youth in STEM. It talks about addressing stereotypes that Andrew mentioned earlier, both stereotypes about STEM and about who does STEM, right? Who is capable in STEM, those really important stereotypes that seem to be super strong. Providing diverse STEM role models. We know that that is very beneficial, especially for girls and marginalized youth. And then we already touched on this too, but something, making STEM personally and culturally relevant to our youth. So again, that goes back to Andrew's question about how we can see STEM differently and more, relate to it more, all of our kids, not just the ones who have a whose parents might have a background in STEM, for example. And then also things like developing a growth mindset we know are important, and making career connections. So Linda touched on this idea of, so if you engage youth in STEM, what can they do next? And what are some actual STEM careers, and how do you get there? So these are all just examples of things that are found in that framework, but we also have supporting documents and resources to help support your work with that framework. And we just offer it as hopefully a helpful tool for after school programs.
If I can just add, I would like to really highlight Karen's work with we have a session coming up at this conference on the If Then collection, which I think is a big part of breaking down some of those stereotypes. I'm a big believer, through being a former school counselor, that they have to see themselves in that role in order to achieve it. And a lot of times, if you're a person of color, if you're a female, that might hold you back, just that vision of it. And what I like about the If Then collection is it offers those pictures. And that is a Saturday morning session that Jessica Hayes going to put on, and there are CEUs available for that session as well. So I encourage everyone to attend. And we also have a mini grant funding opportunity going along with that for summer sessions. But I guess the question that I want to throw out to the panel is, some of those stereotypes can be rooted in families. I've heard a lot more about how, a daughter might approach their dad and say, I want to go to med school. And the dad might say, shouldn't you really go to nursing school? I mean, you're a girl. And some of those stereotypes that are embedded in the family, and how do you work with the families to overcome some of those stereotypes?
Can I jump in?
Yeah.
We often talk about role models being really important for kids. And, in our after school programs, we have role models come, we take them on field trips, and they get to see role models. And parents usually aren't part of those experiences. And I've heard from parents saying like, oh, I really wish that I could meet those role models. So part of it is thinking about how can we increase access for those experiences so that families can see them. During the pandemic, while things were going virtually, some programs were having their role models create videos that they were sharing with their kids. But they thought, when I talked to them about the importance of parents, they said, we never thought about that. This is an opportunity where we can also create those videos and share them with parents. So one, they can see the diversity of role models, but also especially, for families in rural communities, I've talked with partners how, they're really concerned about losing their daughters. If they go into STEM, that they are going to go somewhere else. So being able to have role models from the community who are able to say like, I studied technology, or I went into engineering, and I am still here in the community, and I am with and just as engaged with my family as ever. So really having personal experiences of being able to talk with role models and hear about them is important. And I think too, like sometimes parents also have that stereotype thinking, my daughter isn't interested in engineering, or, oh, she's such a people person, she's not going to want to do this technology. So part of it is dispelling the idea about what the career is for parents. And then part of it's also showing them how much their daughter is enjoying something. We had done a summer camp on cars and engines, and girls got, under the hood of a car and were exploring how to like maintain cars and put together a 4-stroke engine kit. And fathers came back to us and said, oh my gosh, she loves this. I never thought she'd be interested in engines. I do this work with my son. So it's just really helping parents to see it too.
That was really helpful. Thank you, Linda. And Andrew, thank you for, I was actually going to put in a plug for Jessica's session Saturday morning. So thank you so much for bringing that up, because that's a great free resource. And I don't think I'll steal Jessica's thunder by saying this, but we are working on creating a portal within the collection just for after school, which I think will be really helpful for people, so that they'll have a portal where we've combined all the great after school resources. So we've already talked a little bit about role models, and I'd like to sort of expand that to generally partners and other organizations in the community that can help after school programs really broaden participation. Maybe Meeta, you could start off that conversation.
Thank you. Yes, and I'm happy to also share that a piece about role models.
Yes.
In general, we believe really strongly in is that role models need training. So we, Techbridge Girls, never put adults in front of young people without first helping those adults understand how to speak in a way that's receivable by young people, and how to not perpetuate biases inadvertently, unconsciously, and also just how to create an exciting and environment. Role models are often people, so to the extent of partnerships, they could be professionals from small or large businesses in your area, and they aren't in the business of working with young people, and so it's imperative that they're trained first. And so to that end, partnerships are really a cornerstone for what we do at Techbridge Girls, and I think what I've done in after school programs throughout my career. And I think my advice is just to sort of think broadly about them. So one great aspect of partnership, sometimes I hear from after school programs that they want to do STEM activities, but they don't necessarily have the skill sets within their not their educators to do that. That's fine. I think that is where you could go to a local college or university. There are grad students or others that are often more than willing to come in and be sort of the subject matter expert for that time, as well as folks in industry, as we mentioned. And there are also professional groups in your area, Society of Women Engineers, National Society of Black Engineers, and others who are actually in the business of starting to try to get more and more young people into STEM fields. And so they're more than happy to have their college age students or their membership, whether they're young, as young as high school age, or as older in grad school or beyond, to come and work. And the last thing I want to say on that is that don't overlook the expertise in your own community. I know one of the best role models I ever had at a Techbridge Girls program was when we started to actually ask what the parents did for a living. And we somehow got connected to somebody who worked at NASA here in the DC area, where I'm speaking you from. She wasn't necessarily an aeronautics engineer, but she was connected to NASA. And so she, through her interest, connected us to engineers there, or others there. So again, I think parents are an amazing resource. And finally, just don't overlook that the local bakery, the local baker is actually doing STEM. And so don't think about STEM as this sort of some, otherworldly sort of activity. It is actually the thing that we want to help our young people know, is that STEM is part and parcel of everyday life, everything that we do. And so there are lots of opportunities for young people to see and do. When we're back from the pandemic, I really encourage everybody to try to see if you can do field trips, although I know, and we'll put this in the chat later, but there are some really terrific field trip sort of things, pre-made videos online as well. Discovery Education has some really great pre-made trips. So if you can't take a young person somewhere, you can bring that information into the classroom in another way.
A new idea I just wanted to quickly share about role models that I just learned this week in talking with a some partners around the country, was a special role that role models can play that I never thought about was at family events that we have at schools or after school programs. While we strive to have every child have a family member come, and it could be an extended family member, I've heard from some after school staff that some of their kids just don't have anyone at all in their household, and there's extenuating circumstances. And, they've turned to think about role models and mentors who could help fill in and be that champion for that child at a family event. And, kind of made us think about, like, how do we even reimagine or rename our family events to really be inclusive, so that those few students don't really feel out of it and really feel bad when we're having family events.
That's really important, Linda. I'm thinking, so what might we call those family events? Would you just call them community celebrations and just invite young people to just invite whoever they want to attend and celebrate them?
Karen, there is actually, I'm sorry, we have a regional ecosystem that actually does events like that. They call them STEM cafes.
Ooh, yes.
The Tangipahoa ecosystem, the North Shore ecosystem, in Hammond, Louisiana, led by Dr. Wendy Canero at Southeastern Louisiana University, developed these models in which there's Saturday morning events really targeting at low SES families, where STEM professionals throughout the community come together and they do activities. But one of the big things they do at these events is they really coach the family into how to engage these activities. The story that I love to share is a family came to this event, and the first thing the mom said is, "Don't touch that, you'll break it." And the STEM professional then said, "No, he's going to break it, and then we're going to learn how to fix it. It's okay." And so then the parents stepped back and was like, "Okay, I'm going to shut up because I don't know what I'm doing here." But then just kind of coaching, because there is a resiliency component to STEM that I think parents often miss. And that's one of the beauties of these things called STEM cafes, that they're really doing well in the North Shore.
Another idea we might consider too, Karen, is opening it up and asking kids for ideas. I think that they could come up with some creative names or concepts for those events and help structure them. So, we want to listen and learn from parents around family engagement, but I think also as part of family engagement events, listening and learning from kids too.
That's a great idea. As adults, we don't have to think everything up, right?
And I think just to follow up on what Andrew was saying, we also don't have to be the experts. So I think the more families can have that experience with their kids at events like the STEM Cafe, the more they can see too that I don't have to have that STEM knowledge and skills to encourage my kid or to be a part of what they're doing. And I think that goes for educators too, because I was not trained in a STEM profession, right? But part of the beauty of working with youth in STEM is that we're all trying to figure it out together. And you want the kids to be going through that inquiry process and to be testing things and making mistakes and learning from those mistakes. And we can do that with them. And I've even experienced that with my own kids because I want to encourage them in STEM. But, again, I'm not a STEM professional per se, right? And I don't know some of the content that they're learning or working with, but I can still be part of that learning process with them. And I think it's helpful as a parent to kind of learn that and feel like, oh, okay, I can do this and I don't have to have all of this experience or expertise.
If I could just jump in, Brenda, I think that's a really brilliant point. I think goes back to Andrew's earlier point too about the sort of, I think you said it's a way of thinking. And so if we sort of allow ourselves to understand this as creating an environment of inquiry and learning and risk taking and making a lot of mistakes, that is 90% of the work. That is the engineering design process. And that is actually, again, part of something that young people have experienced families have experienced. They just don't name it as such. So I think if we can kind of reframe what this is all about, maybe we take some of the sort of, you know, stigma around or the barrier away from this being some sort of otherworldly kind of activity. And it might also encourage our educators to feel equipped, because they certainly, as youth development professionals, certainly should be, and I think feel more comfortable just engaging young people in conversation and thinking and curiosity. If they can do that, they can encourage them to, you know, build a rocket ship. It's really that. It really starts from there.
And if I could just jump on that real quick, another avenue that we've noticed is when engineering firms come in and talk about how we have Intralocked, which is a big processing factory in Jefferson Parish. They tell us all the time, it's not really about the 4.0 student they're looking for. It's the student that knows how to fight through failure, who knows how to be resilient. And they say the biggest struggle they have is the 4.0 student that they come in there and has never really dealt with that tough task and doesn't have the resiliency. And we've tried to incorporate that to the STEM Cafe model by showing parents this is a skill that the new companies are really wanting, this resiliency aspect, this problem solving aspect. It's not just about having the 4.0 GPA.
And it's not necessarily connected to STEM, right? It's a perspective. It's right. It's not necessarily a STEM skill.
Exactly.
Andrew, this is Diane Madden. Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Yes,
Diane, nice to see you.
Hey, I was just going to comment about our engineering students, and we have a women in engineering club here on campus at Louisiana Tech University, and they have put together, and when everything was rolling right, they would go to the farmers market on Saturday morning and present their STEM activities, and it would be women engineers, students and all that would interact with the families and the children when they came through the farmers market. And I think that's an excellent way to get out there in the community too, and let the kids see and the parents see that it's not just men that are in engineering or in STEM fields. You know, there are these women that are actively involved. So I think that's a great way to get out too. So
I love that idea, Diane, in terms of like going to families where they are in kind of untraditional places like a farmer's market.
Right.
And I've heard groups go with STEM kits to like grocery stores and, you know, just making things really easy and accessible for families.
Right. And preparing little STEM kits that they can take home with them is another way that they do it. You know, they'll have one activity there for them to look at, and then they'll give them a little bag of something you can do at home with your family when you get home. So that's another way to reach out and help these students learn more about what's there and available for them. But, yeah.
That's a great example. Thank you, Diane. That sounds amazing. And I think the other thing that's doing is it's also breaking down those stereotypes, right? Because we know, at least from girls, when they hear women in STEM talking about their lives outside of their job, it's really valuable for them, because you don't always know that if you work in STEM, you can also have this other life, right? You can still have a life. And so seeing that at the farmers market or somewhere in the community just helps to, I think, reinforce that as well.
And then, you know, on the other aspect too, we have nursing here at Louisiana Tech, and they go out in the community and do things. But I think it's great when the young men who are nurses or majoring in nursing go out and the boys see them, because I remember when my son majored in nursing, I thought, I don't know where this is going to, but there's so many more avenues that will open up, not just floor nursing, but from nursing, there's a world of things that you can do. So, you know, it's good to see both aspects. The girls see what they can do and the boys see what they can do. So I think it's a great way. It's for these kids to get out in the community.
What I wanted to add to this conversation, it was that about creating the space. So we're talking so much about making sure that the environment around our young people creates safe learning and safety and learning and making mistakes. And that's exactly right. I often get this question about why at Techbridge Girls we create girl-only spaces. And so I kind of want to address that because I want to make sure that folks understand that when so many stereotypes are around young people, it does take sort of this extra effort to create a space where girls can then, be at the same level of confidence as, say, their fellow peers, their male counterparts. But it's not necessary only to have a girl-only space, but we have found for so many years that it makes a huge difference in elevating the girls' abilities to feel like they can make mistakes out loud or that they can take risks. And then when they come back to the classroom, they feel that much more capable. Of course, you can also create that safe space in a co-gender environment. It just takes a different sort of training for the educator to make sure that that person is paying attention to making sure everyone's voice in that room is included well. And the last thing I want to say on that is that I literally just got this question yesterday of why girls only. And I realized that in our schools and our after school programs, we do allow for boys to have boys only sports, but we never say how come what are we going to do with the girls if there's a boys only sport. But I often get the question, what are we going to do with the boys if there's a girl only club? And I just think we need to sort of address that head on and address the bias head on and really think about why it's important to, create special spaces for kids so that they can then be nurtured through the role models and all of the activities that are designed just for them.
And I just had a conversation on this very topic yesterday with some folks in Tulsa, Oklahoma. They were looking to have more computer science classes and AP computer science classes in high schools. And one of the things that we were talking about is how traditionally many more boys enroll in these classes. So when we talked about the fact of having some girls only coding programs and after school, the executive director of this group said, oh, we could like frame it as it's an on-ramp to get the girls confident and engaged in computer science so that they will participate in these classes once they're offered at the high school. So, a way of framing it to help families understand why we'd be doing something like that.
This is a really important discussion. I would like to ask any of our panelists, I think it might be helpful to maybe highlight just one or two very specific strategies if you're not able to have, and I tend to say 4 girls instead of girls only, 4 girls, a group, if you're in a co-gender environment, what are just 1 or 2 strategies that can be helpful for creating a safe space? I think that might be helpful for this audience.
I guess I can take that first, but I think one important thing is we have found over time that girls really do resonate with being able to use STEM to make change in their worlds. They tend to like that a little bit better than to do competitive things just for the sake of competition. And so if there's a way to create a space within a co-gender program where everybody is working towards using STEM to make change in their personal lives, in their schools, in their communities somehow, that would be one strategy I would recommend.
That's helpful. And that's not a hurtful strategy for boys, correct?
Not at all.
Groups, right? Yeah, Linda, go ahead.
I think also setting up practices. So if you're working, oftentimes projects are like team-based. So if you're working with a group, like, just having it set up that roles are going to rotate. So everybody's going to have the same amount of time to assume a different role or the time on the computer. So it's not just like we had talked before, like the person with the most confidence or competence that's going to hog the tools or the computer, of just really making like this just a process. And also be explicit and talk about these things, because I think sometimes we're doing certain things or social engineering and we've got equity reasons in mind, but we're not explicit with kids about why we're doing it. So I think that's really important too.
Yeah, those are two of the ones that popped into my mind. So I appreciate you both touching on them. I think related to kind of seeing the value in STEM that Meeta mentioned is that personal relevance, right? So connecting it to what the kids already know, what they're already familiar with, what they're interested in. As you know, as I think Andrew and others mentioned at the beginning, we know that there's STEM all around them, and they probably know more about STEM than they might think they do because of how we kind of portray STEM in the world. And then I think even something as simple as how you have your space designed, right? So it's different if you're doing virtual programming versus in person, but we know that even having like diverse images of, you know, of people, but especially related to STEM in your space. And when you draw on examples, you know, to not just point out, you know, Albert Einstein, for example, right? But there are a lot of women who, and people of color who have been really important to our history of scientific understanding that we could talk about, we could read about, and just having pictures of girls and women of color doing STEM in a variety of ways can really change how a kid walks into a space and feels.
If I could just add, I think there's always a big blend between SEL and STEM. And I think many after-school experts are reluctant to jump into STEM because they might be like me and made a C in trigonometry in high school, or struggled with chemistry. And because they don't have those strongs, they don't think they're properly suited. But kind of to the points that Linda was making, there's some SEL components to it where it's project-based learning, it's group-based learning. And if you're an expert in SEL, you would be very properly suited for leading some of these STEM activities because it's about those relationships. It's about understanding, you know, I'm not going to put the dominant extrovert in an activity with the introvert, and understanding those group dynamics and how to foster that project-based learning.
I think Linda has a response, right, Linda?
What's interesting is that sometimes students will lift up and be their best in our after school programs because of the space and the projects, like the projects that are project-based learning. You know, in some classes I've seen a student who was, you know, in a special ed strand who stood out and was the best in her Techbridge after school program in a way that she never was in her regular classes. So, you know, the activities that we design and the way we set up the interactions can really give kids who sometimes don't have an opportunity to, you know, be engaged in science or are forced to be on the sidelines in a tech class because they're in special ed. So thinking about those opportunities in those students as well. Oh, and just a quick thing, because Andrew's brought up a couple of times in terms of grades and you know, adults who might not be like the super stellar math genius. And what's interesting is that we've had some role models who have come through and have said you know, I failed a course, I didn't do well, but I persisted and I am the finest engineer there is. And I love my job. And I just gush about loving being an engineer, but I struggled. You know, one engineer talked about having a learning disability and you know, she says, I never disclosed that in my professional world because, you know, I might get dinged on that. But when she shared it with kids, it was you know, some kids' eyes really brightened because it was oh my gosh, I've got a learning disability. I could be like her. So really helping role models know the value in terms of them sharing that message for where they might struggle academically, because kids really think these role models are super A's, super brilliant, and so far away from where they are.
I think that speaks a little bit to Meeta's comment about training role models, right? Because often I know we need to encourage them to share those sort of personal details. They're very willing to talk about, you know, their amazing jobs, but you have to remind them that it's important for young people to know that they have hobbies and they have a pet. And maybe you could say a little bit more about that, Meeta.
Yeah, it's similar. As we literally sort of, in a way, script our role models. We provide them a template PowerPoint so that they know to put in pictures of themselves at home as real human beings, right, doing real things. At the same time, we look at those in advance so that we make sure that they're not overly expressing their privilege, right? So they're keeping it sort of at an approachable level. And all of those things do take time, but they're well worth it. Imagine the amount of time it takes to find a role model to bring him and her into your classroom. You know, if you take a little bit more time and make sure they're really well prepared, the entire experience goes really well. And by the way, also to you know, prepare your young people to receive, because it's important that young people know to ask. That's okay to ask questions, that, you know, how to sort of engage with this person, and then again, it doesn't end up being like an awkward thing. By the way, we at Techbridge Girls don't love panel. This is a panel, but for young people, they can be deathly. So I just would like to just put in a plug to see if there are other ways. Certainly it's great to have adults come in and speak, but then also maybe support that with a hands-on activity that reflects the work of whoever is speaking. Then that really sticks for the young person. The other thing I wanted to, quickly mention is that we learned such hard lessons from assuming a lot about the activities that we were trying to share. I remember us trying to share about windmills or sort of air circulation and force, and we use the example of windmills and we had blank stares. So I think that, you know, that's where contextualizing and asking kids, where have you seen this sort of thing before, rather than just saying, you know, this is how force of air works. That way young people were able to say, oh, that's the fan, you know, above my range hood, or that's the fan in my window, rather than it being, and then that becomes relevant, and then that becomes engaging STEM. So that's gender neutral, right? That's just about making STEM very relevant.
That's really helpful. And I appreciate you saying that we're not really modeling in this panel presentation the best way for young people to learn from STEM role models. Can you say just a little bit more about that, Meeta, about you know, having young people engage in an activity? Like, what is the sort of value? I mean, I think we're all assuming that's valuable, but if you could say a little bit more about it.
Sure. I mean, I think that, well, for example, we've had lots of women come in that talk about things like cybersecurity. It's a very, very, it feels like a very esoteric topic. And frankly, I don't even always know how to talk about these folks' titles. I mean, they're very complicated for me. And so it helps to then have the person and enable them to kind of break it down into how cybersecurity might affect their everyday life. And so then we might take an activity. It doesn't always have to be completely hands-on. I know that in one case we did cybersecurity through little game cards or a piece of paper that helped kids map like how their internet, you know, might be breached in some way and how that might affect where that might affect, and kids were able to identify that, oh, that might affect my app that I want to get to on my phone, or the thing that, you know, my mom uses to get to work, or my GPS to get to work, etc. And then that was a way that the activity came all the way around. In those instances, though, is where I think, again, our youth development professionals can be super helpful. So we always recommend that in addition to the STEM expert, there is, you know, sort of somebody trained in, as Andrew said, like sort of creating the environment of learning and inquiry, so that we're the expert on youth development and they're the expert on STEM, and the two come together, you know, beautifully.
Karen, I just wanted to mention another resource. If you're not familiar with Sci Girls, they are an initiative out of Twin Cities Public Television, and they do TV shows, videos, as well as educational outreach. But they've developed a nice series of STEM role model videos, which can be helpful because you're not always able to bring someone into your program, nor do you want, you want all the time. But something that somebody touched on about background of the role models too, is that they've taken care to make sure that their role models in the videos are not all from the same background, right? And that they have different career pathways. And there's even this, one of my favorites is actually a welder. So it reminded me of that when Andrew was making that example earlier. And there's also a whole series focused on Latinx women in STEM. And so it can be a really nice way to just expose all of your kids to a variety of careers and just to show the different people that are in those careers without, when you can't or when you're not bringing in a role model in person. I think we can I'll put the resource in the chat.
I put it
Okay.
in the chat. Yeah, I put it in the chat. And I think there are like 7 videos that are in Spanish as well, from Latino Side Girls, right?
Yeah, maybe 5 or 7 of the Latina STEM professionals did theirs in Spanish with English subtitles, and then a couple of them did them in English with Spanish subtitles, I believe.
Go ahead, Linda. I think you have something to add to this.
Yeah, I also wanted to go back and just quickly touch upon something Meeta had said about also prepping the students. And it's like a small detail, but it's these kind of small details that really make for a richer experience. In advance of having role models come, we would share like little bios back and forth so that the girls would learn about who the role models were who were coming and know about a bit about them. And then the girls would share a little bio about themselves for the role model. And then we could ask the girls in advance, read this bio before we go on this field trip and have a set of questions prepared that you're going to ask, and actually set up an expectation that over the course of this field trip or over the lunchtime that you have, you're required to ask some questions, because kids sometimes can be intimidated going on a field trip or meeting with role models, and some kids just jump in and are extroverts, and some kids hold back and have great questions. So just like framing the situation and having the expectations, and maybe first field trip, it's really awkward and scary for the girl, but if she keeps on having these experiences, she will get more comfortable and be able to learn how to network and manage your room and really take advantage of opportunities.
Thank you for that, Linda. And I'm going to put one more resource in the chat. The National Girls Collaborative Project manages a database called FabFems, and these are role models that indicate their availability and their interests, and it's a great place to find role models. There are about 2,500 women in there, wide range, and we sort of vet all of those. We review all of those, so you know that they've gone through a process before their profile's been created. So I want to make sure that we have time for questions from attendees. So please feel free to unmute yourself. We'd love to hear your voice or to see you. If you have questions, put questions in the chat. And I was also hoping for a little more crowdsourcing around partners, community organizations as well. So I'm going to pause and see what sort of questions we have. And I see Sabrina is talking about the colonial pipeline, and yeah, I've been wondering about if that has created, and Sabrina put that in there, has that created sort of increased awareness about cybersecurity, especially in Louisiana, because I think you're affected quite a bit, have been affected by that. I'd love to hear from somebody if there have been conversations about that.
I do know that Senator Cassidy was on Meet the Press recently, our senator in Louisiana, and he was talking about how, yes, it has affected Louisiana. I don't know if those discussions are being carried through in the classroom, but I do want to I appreciate Sabrina putting a lot of resources in the chat, but I guess I could throw this question out there. Like, when you have a relevant topic like the pipeline and the gas, is that a great opening to have a STEM discussion or in the after school program? Because kind of a theme we've been hitting on is, and I've seen this at a lot of ecosystems meetings, which is a lot of STEM teachers view after school programs as kind of a sandbox, meaning they don't have to deal with the 15-minute lesson plans. There's a freedom to have discussion and allow for the connection of STEM to everyday lives and those discussions that you might not be able to have in the everyday classroom because of the time constraints that they are often under.
I think it's a great opportunity, right? In after school, because of all of those sort of interdisciplinary connections you can make, and not necessarily have the activity be STEM. Like let's do STEM now. And I'd love to hear from the panelists sort of around that opportunity that after school provides for broadening participation generally.
I mean, I can just jump in real quickly and just share that, right? We can't divest the concepts from our everyday life and the power that young people have to make change. And I think we like to really start from that. Not only is STEM part of our young people's lineage, especially people of color, and girls, but it also is part of the power of their future. And so, yes, as my point earlier was, that is exactly the point at which you can sort of help folks understand the problem and think about how they might solve it. I mean, the pipeline is one. I know in Louisiana, the sort of local pollution around oil spills is another. So water filtration is an activity that we do maybe normally, but now how about putting it in context of water filtration and actually how it has disproportionately affected folks of color in and around that area and or the economy. And so what might they do to make that change? By the way, the Flint water crisis, part of the engineers that helped solve that was an African-American man. And so it's great to also have maybe your youth professionals try to find those examples, again, bringing in the role models, we're bringing in the sort of STEM identity and wrapping it around. You don't have to have a special lesson around that, because I think, again, young people know how to research things if they're driven to want to and see its relevance. So you can encourage them to research it and then use everyday found tools to try to make a solution.
Yeah, I think that's great. And I just wanted to throw out an example. I live in Portland, Oregon, and a few years ago, our schools, it was discovered that there was lead in the water in our school buildings, which of course got the entire community involved in this issue all of a sudden. But a group an after school group that I've worked with, they took that information and they started researching, water quality, lead in water. And really they ended up presenting to the school board because, not surprisingly, the schools that were most impacted were in schools that were serving more kids of color and lower SES. And I mean, it was a STEM lesson, right? But it was really relevant to what everybody was focusing on and experiencing in their daily life. And so I think, yeah, the example that you threw out, Andrew, and then Meeta, is a great opportunity to jump on. And it's not just about STEM, it's about so many other things.
Are there some specific examples in Louisiana that we'd like to talk about? We have about 10 minutes left, so I want to make sure that we do answer your questions and hear from you, since so many of you, I'm sure, have a lot to contribute to this conversation. And panelists, feel free to build in your comments as well as people are thinking about their questions.
I think one thing I'll just throw out there is we're allowing time for questions is kind of goes back to Linda's comment about mom magic and, you know, having the resources and information to get what you need for your kid. I think the same is true for our after school educators. And I know I felt this way when I worked in after school. You know, I wasn't comfortable leading STEM activities how I perceived them, but there are so many resources now for supporting educators to do STEM and after school that I think it's a matter of accessing those resources and figuring out ways for us as a field to make sure that people get what they need. And it's not about reinventing the wheel, right, anymore. It's really about tapping into resources that people have developed and spent time on. So it's not really an answer, but it's more something to just throw out there, I think.
Well, I think that also goes to our conversation around partnerships and community organizations, right? That you don't have to necessarily create something that you can look to an organization that might have created something or might have the expertise to help you as well. So I think in this last 10 minutes, and I'll keep watching for questions in the chat, I'd like to ask each panelist to sort of share sort of an actionable step for the folks attending this, one sort of last piece of a takeaway or action, and maybe also sort of a hope. I know I didn't prepare you for a hope, but I know you all have hopes, sort of, you know, as we close out here.
I'll step up.
Thank you, Linda.
So my call to action is to celebrate the glorious goofs. And it really is about celebrating our lessons learned and our mistakes. At Techbridge Girls, our staff wanted to support girls to feel confident taking on challenges or making mistakes. And so they created posters on the wall that would be glorious goofs, where when you were working on something and it wasn't going quite right, you could take a moment to take a deep breath, step back, and go up to the poster and write your glorious goof. And, you know, it was started by the staff themselves to show that, like, you know, I'm working on these projects and I'm making mistakes and things aren't going right. So I think one is, you know, with your work in after school, with your STEM activities, with your family engagement, you know, it's a journey. You will do things and have missteps. You will learn lessons. And what really I hope you do is to, one, share what you're learning, because we learn from failures, and also support all the members of your teams as they're trying things and are making mistakes, of allowing them that space to try something that they have an idea for. So what I hope is that we really embrace the idea of, like, I'm willing to try. I have this idea that I don't know if it's going to work, but I want to try.
Thank you. Meeta, can I ask you to go next to share?
Sure. You know, at Techbridge Girls, we like to equate equity with girls being, doing, and using STEM. So just, if that helps everybody, just remember that they need to see themselves so that they can become STEM practitioners. They need to do it. They need to have their hands in it. And they need to use STEM to make change in their lives. And, you know, my hope is that, so I hope that's helpful, but I also hope that we in the after school arena can take the time to engage families and partners to round out the environment around learning for our young people, and especially to encourage young people to STEM.
Thank you.
I get, something that someone told me, I really appreciate both Meeta's final comments. Somebody a number of years ago told me something that has always stuck. That is that you want to assume that everybody can do STEM and that everybody wants to do STEM. So it's not this process when you're working with youth about, oh, I wonder if, she would be interested in STEM, or I'm not sure. It's really more coming from the assumption that everybody is interested. Everybody needs to know STEM, whether or not they choose it for a career, and that everybody is definitely capable, right? And so if you have that assumption, I think it kind of, it flows naturally in terms of how you work with kids in the STEM environment, STEM activities. And I would just also say, I think that when I work with people doing STEM with kids, it's the youth development piece that's so important and that some people don't have. So after school educators are coming with that skill, right? That's your expertise, that's what you do. And really incorporating STEM into that is not, it's not as big of a shift as some might think, because you really have the important elements already in your toolkit. And I guess my hope would just be that we continue down this road of really tapping into what youth bring with them, right, to STEM, and we really change how we all see STEM. I know is big and vague, but I think we've talked about it enough that I can say that at the end.
You can say that. And I think, oh, were you done, Brenda? Yeah, I do. I think also, we can bring it back to the framework where we have a whole category called youth-centric, right? Where we're really focused on what youth bring to the table. So I want to express my appreciation to Linda and Brenda and Meeta for sharing all your amazing expertise. This has been, I've learned a lot, and it's been inspiring, and I hope all of you have learned a lot. Feel free to keep in touch with us. Can I ask each of you to put your emails in the chat, so that if any of you have any follow-up questions, we're all happy to respond to you. And also Andrew knows how to get a hold of us. And thanks for the opportunity to talk with all of you today. And I know Andrew has a little bit that he would like to say. So I gave you 4 minutes. Andrew, you wanted 2 and I gave you 4.
Okay, thank you so much. I just want to remind everybody that this session is being recorded. It can be available through the conference website, and also it will eventually be uploaded to the network's YouTube channel. I encourage everyone to reach out to the panelists if you're having issues with your STEM programming, and I encourage you to kind of use some of these sessions as some good conversation starters to get to the why behind STEM and what might be holding up engagement with your students, and particularly some of those beliefs that might exist among your staff as to, are your students ready for STEM, or these beliefs with parent engagement as well. I also want to thank Sabrina Gomez for putting all these great resources into the chat. You can access these resources also through our network newsletter. If you have not signed up, we continue to pump out some of these moonshot resources. And also coming up at 4:15, there is a Million Girls Moonshot session on engineering mindset that I encourage everybody to attend. Also, I encourage everybody to attend Jessica Hayes' session this Saturday from 8:30 to 10, which will be on the If Then collection, which is a great resource to push back at some of those stereotypes of STEM stereotypes out there. And big reminder, both of those sessions, the MGM Engineering Mindset session and also the If Then collection, do have CEU credits attached with them. So I know teachers are looking for those opportunities. Thank y'all so much for participating today. I think this was a very great discussion around it. And hopefully we can invite you back for next year's conference.
We'll come back, right? We're committed.
Thank you all for joining us. It was great to be here.
Have a great rest of your day.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.